You may yourself have said, or at the very least heard someone once say, "Why am I so sore in the morning?" In the morning specifically. And maybe you notice the pain goes away as you start moving, but this is a very common thing, especially past a certain age. Sorry. And we can kind of get it down to two pretty simple reasons. The stiffness and the painfulness come down to shortening of tissues, soft tissues that have hardened, and unimpeded pain signals coming through as we sleep. Both these things happening as we sleep. And we're going to try and keep this as basic as possible so most people can understand it. But do understand that a lot of it actually comes down to movement. And in the daytime, we have more movement, and at nighttime, we have less movement. And this movement will create two really simple things: length, changes in length, and as well it will block out a certain amount of sensation of pain. We're going to start with the length concept to begin. In any case, with movement and movement of joints, there's always muscles that go between those joints, and the muscles and the soft tissue are really one. We're gonna stick to the muscles now as a concept. So let's say you've got this rather robust bicep here, and it has a few attachment points above and below this bone that we call the humerus right here. As we move that joint, as we take it through ranges of motion, whether that's the elbow moving, could be the shoulder moving backwards, forwards, left and right, all that stuff. But as we take it through ranges of motion, that muscle will lengthen. It will lengthen because both points of attachment are moving further apart. And now, this is somewhat commonly known about muscles, but for those of you who are uninitiated, the muscles are essentially tubes within tubes, fibers within fibers, whatever you want to call that. And so as we lengthen the muscle, those fiber length changes and they slide one on top of the other. And this keeps them in a state where they are more free to move, because it turns out it's not just about the fibers, there are actually connective tissues that run in between all these things. And if they have periods of immobility, they actually do get a bit gummed up. They get kind of stuck together. That's not a very technical term, but you get the idea. These might be called adhesions, or excess builds up of extracellular matrix. Again, very technical stuff. But the truth is, lack of movement tends to stiffen and thicken muscle. Now, this is slight. It's not very much, but it's enough to notice. Now, we can couple that with other things, because it turns out that the blood supply to this area, to any muscle really, and the whole body, runs between the muscles. So we're going to throw in a vein here, because that's the one we're more concerned with. There's, of course, arteries, all these things, arteries going down like so. But understand, it happens to be underneath that muscle. We've also got lymphatics, and the reason we mention these ones in particular, lymphatics and veins, is because they require, in a much larger way, the contraction of the muscle backwards and forwards, on and off, to generate a pumping mechanism. So that muscle's movement actually generates a lot of fluid flow out of the tissue, and that can be locally within the muscle itself, but again, through these tissues, it generates it and brings it back to the heart. It helps it return. That muscle is a fluid pump as much as it is a joint moving system. So these are both really important things. Staticness not only creates adhesion, like a thickening of the tissue and a slowing of the tissue, but as well it slows the fluid drainage. And when you start to pack fluid into a tissue, it makes it so that there's less room. Even if it's just a slight excess, which is all it ever is, even if it's just a slight excess, it can make it a little bit harder, a little bit stiffer, rigid to work with. It's kind of like injecting it. It's not literally injecting it, but it's kind of like filling it with some extra. So those fibers spreading apart, they have a resistance to doing that. Now, one interesting little side jog here. So this is the fluid component. But what should happen, linking this up to a few other areas of the body, is that when we are sleeping at night, what we should be doing is having a deeper, a more extensive respiration. So deeper respiration, a breathing cycle. would be the technical term for that. And that respiration generates an up and down pumping motion of the main respiratory muscle, which creates more fluid motion through the body. And it should compensate for this. It also will have some involuntary turning, some rotation of the arms and legs and of the whole body, really, so it maintains a certain amount of movement as we sleep. So if you have an affected respiratory cycle, you may find that you stiffen up faster than you used to as this respiratory problem increases. So that's something to consider. It's a bit of a side note, but it is certainly something to consider. Now, on this movement end, we're going to take another bit of a direction. So there's our length. That's what we're thinking on that one. Talked about the fluid, but we're also changing nerve tone. That nerve tone is, of course, generated by the central nervous system initially. So that central nervous system creates the movement. It actually gets the muscles to contract, and those muscles change the length. And we have a certain amount of resting tone. So let's say we've got now, we'll take a tricep in this case. So this tricep muscle, for instance, also has attachment points, high and low, and it has a muscle belly inside it, and its contraction generated by the nervous system makes it so that muscle will shorten. And that is, in fact, to some extent, constantly happening. So there's always a certain amount of resting nerve tone in essentially every muscle. And this is something very technical. Watch out now. This is something controlled by gamma motor neurons. This is very scary, I know. But the gamma motor neurons are in the spinal cord. They're part of that central nervous system. And they will say to a muscle, you need to be this length. You must be, in fact, this length and no other length. And if you give it time, the muscle will shorten to that length automatically. The only way to totally relax the muscle is actually to, in fact, cut the nerve or destroy that area of the central nervous system. And we don't want to do that. So this gamma motor neuron will set a resting length. Now with strain, so as strain, we'll put that there, strain and misuse and all kinds of bad irritation, as it irritates the gamma motor neuron, it can confuse its resting tone. It can confuse the resting length. And so it can make it so that if we allow it, the muscle will have to shorten more than it should. And because during the daytime we're moving more, we can resist this. If we take that away, if we take away our daytime activities and we sleep through the night, we might end up resulting in a much shorter muscle, something that's much less likely to move. So when you wake up in the morning, you find that the tone, having been set too high, the tone contracts the muscle, shortening it over time. And in addition to our lack of fluid movement through the area, in addition to our improper drainage and the thickening or the coming together of the muscle fibers, may have a less mobile tissue. So this is something we want to avoid, of course, because it's painful and uncomfortable. Okay, so those are two possibilities. Let's start talking about a third one. So what you have to understand is that when we are moving around, movement, period, mechanical movement, and we'll say specifically mechanical movement, will block out the sensation of pain. That one specifically. So pain blocking is a very normal effect. So if we have pain coming back to the central nervous system, it is a known thing. And this is just as simple as like you bang your toe and then you rub it afterwards, or any part of your body. It feels better temporarily. The damage has not been undone. It's exactly the same as it was before you rubbed it as it is after. But what happens is mechanical movement will actually block out the sensation. It'll cut it off, and it will get sent through instead of that. So you'll get more mechanical sensation generally than you get pain. This is a very normal thing. So you'll only be aware of the pain to a certain extent. This is a survival mechanism. It makes it so that if you're injured, you're capable of running away from something that might be trying to eat you, for instance. And it's a very important thing that this happens. But it also means something important happens during night. So the nighttime, because we have less movement, you will find that if an area is affected, let's say you've got a real painful wrist, oh boy, that thing's hurting, and it's sending the signal of pain through during the daytime, because we've got lots of movement happening, because we've got all this movement happening, it will very effectively block out the pain. But as soon as we go to bed, that movement will no longer be occurring. Mechanical motion, very specifically, will no longer be occurring. So we get rid of that, and we can get rid of that, and we get an unrelenting amount of pain coming through. We get a true read, in fact. That's the accuracy effect there. We get a true read of our pain coming through. And so when we wake up in the morning, when it finally becomes daytime, we get rid of all that, we notice that our sensation is very accurate of what the body is doing. It's in fact truthful. And so it's telling you about some unresolved thing, of course. But during the daytime, especially when you first wake up, before you've started moving, pain is coming through without anything inhibiting it. And this is why you often find that as you start moving through the day, as you get the body going, the pain gradually diminishes, which is a good thing. At least we have that. However, there is more to this. So what ultimately happens is with pain, and this is a very normal thing, it's a hardwired thing. With pain, we get activation of what we might call our fight or flight response, our sympathetic nervous system. So this wrist that is really bugging us still. There are plenty of receptors. Now you can take this a few different ways. There are plenty of receptors all over for pain, and they will go back, they are pain of course, and they will go back to that central nervous system. But with that, because the body believes itself to be being actively injured, it will also activate what we call the sympathetic nervous system along with that pain. This is totally normal. Activates the sympathetic nervous system, and that feeds back again into our central nervous system. It believes itself to be actively injured and believes itself to need to tense up. A couple of different effects will happen because of this. You will get more blood flow going to those muscles. So whatever muscles have, whether it's that bicep again, could be the tricep, maybe it's the anterior and posterior forearm muscles, something like that. We'll just throw a few of those in there. But understand that as we get more stressed out, as we get more sympathetic, we get plus blood flow, blood flow to that area. And it means those muscles will tend to grow more, and it tends to be that they'll be a little more active, and it's a lot easier to make them more active. But something else happens in addition to this. With sympathetic activation, the fascias, all those connective tissues around the muscles, every single one, and around every single joint, really the entire body. We should try to be as specific as possible, but every single tissue has a fascial layer around it. And though it's not commonly known, it's getting there, but it's not commonly known, the fascia has a contractile element to it. We're on the cusp of that getting commonly known. Not there yet. But in any case, they have a contractile element. So as we increase sympathetic tone, this is what monitors that reflex and is part of what feeds back into the system. And this is what we call an afferent part of the reflex, communication to the central nervous system. And what ends up happening is if we increase the sympathetic irritation, add a bunch of that to that tissue, the reflex, the other part of the arm, reflex nerve arm, will turn up the tone in that fascia, and we'll get a general thickening of that fascia. So it will start to bind up much more easily. And so on the morning, on the rise of the sun, we can see that we can have pain coming through on this side of it, and we can have a tissue that is involuntarily contracted upwards, leading to decreased mobility and decreased ability to tolerate pain. So what does this ultimately result in? What are we going to do about this? Because that's the real question. What are we going to do? And the truth is we have to deal with that myofascia. Ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to. And myo meaning muscle, fascial meaning connective tissue. It means a lot of things, but in this particular situation, we're going to treat it as connective tissue. And understand, to answer this question, what we're going to do about it is we have to deal with the fluid, the tone of the muscle, and then the sympathetic nervous system. So dealing with stiffness comes down to your preparation. We need to encourage flexibility and we need to encourage suppleness. And this may involve regular and very safe stretching routines, manual therapies like osteopathy, fascial stretch therapy, it's in the name, and of course chiropractic physiotherapy. Yoga happens to be a very good one, but Tai Chi and Qigong are well worth mentioning. And some of it comes in the form of preparation. This is about it. Fascia takes time to deal with. Fascia takes time and energy. So to get that quality that you want, to get that quality of moving tissue that doesn't bind up on you constantly, especially in the morning, you've got to spend the time prepping it. On the other end too, we've got to take care of that sympathetic nervous system. We've got to take care of that. And that is dealing with your pain. And that can be various forms of pain management. So we've got to figure out how we're going to get rid of that. We've got to minus that one out. And we may have to do central nervous system related things. And this is the scary one because there are some times where it does involve stress management. And you need to do whatever it is you need to do to get that out of your life as best as you can. And it may mean having a conversation you don't want to have. So good luck with that. That one I can't help with you. But anyways, I hope that made sense. This has been Simple Lines Anatomy. Have a great day.